Thank you all. This is Kamal Mustafa from Bangladesh.
Assalamu alaikum.
Good morning to all, Ambassador. I'm from Tunisia.
Whoa, Johns Hopkins here, at home. So, Mustafa, where are you working now? Apna kaj batay? Huh?
Bangladesh.
Huh?
My country is Bangladesh, and I am working in an organization at North Bengal.
Okay, ICDDRB আমার কাজ থাকি এখন না পরে. Okay, we need to stop talking.
No worries. I will just introduce myself here. Welcome to everybody. My name is Tanya Lewis, and I am the Associate Editor for Health and Medicine at Scientific American, based here in New York City. And I would like to welcome you to this panel, which is part of the UN DESA Global Policy Dialogue Series. I've been covering the COVID-19 crisis since the very beginning, when it was just a mysterious pneumonia in Wuhan, China. And we've obviously come a long way since then and learned a great deal about this disease, this very deadly disease, but we obviously are very far from the end of the crisis. So I'm hoping that this panel will be able to shed some light on the ways in which science and technology can help to get us out of this crisis. We have a lot of great guests today and limited time, so I would really appreciate it if everyone could try to keep your remarks fairly brief, and then we'll have more time for discussion and questions. We want to make this a very conversational event, so feel free to raise your hand and I will call on you to jump in. Also, welcome to our Facebook audience. This is being streamed live on Facebook and on the UN DESA Facebook page. So I'd now like to introduce Mr. Munia Akram, who's President of the UN Economic and Social Council. And that will be followed by a brief video from Mr. Liu Zhenmin, who is the UN Undersecretary General for Economic and Social Affairs. So, Mr. President, you now have the floor. Mr. Akram. Not sure if he's on the line here. If you're on the line, Mr. President, will you please unmute and go ahead and make your remarks? And it looks like, not sure if he's on the line here. Mr. Akram, can you hear us? Well, maybe we will give him a moment.
No, yes.
Oh, okay, great. Thank you. Go ahead. And just a reminder to everyone, please keep your cameras off and the microphones on mute, just so that we don't have any interference. It's all yours.
This important global online dialogue on technological and science-based solutions to the COVID-19 challenge. It is the availability and the application of advanced technologies, especially digital communications, which have enabled the world to function and communicate during this pandemic. It is this technology also which will enable us to resort to testing and tracing in order to control the virus. And it is again science which has been mobilized to deliver and develop a vaccine against the virus, which we hope will be available to us soon and in record time. I believe that if we are to build back better from the wreckage of the COVID crisis and accelerate the realization of the SDGs and climate goals, the application and absorption of new technologies and in the development paradigm is indispensable. Indeed, it's imperative. It is indeed such science and technology solutions that provide us with enormous opportunities to leapfrog the developing countries into a modern and advanced development paradigm. If we are to succeed in realizing this objective, it is essential that the fruits of scientific research should be fully and universally available, that we should leave no one behind. The DESA's recent policy brief on the Science Technology Society interface puts forward recommendations that would strengthen the contribution of science and technology and innovation towards the COVID-19 recovery and advancing the SDGs. As president of ECOSOC, I am convening the UN Commission on Science and Technology for Development. And I have suggested that this year we focus on 3 priority objectives. First, there is the need to align the intellectual property regime with the SDGs. Proposals have been made for IP exemptions for COVID-19 and health-related technologies and IP-protected products. I would propose to go a bit further and to review the thousands of patents which identify number of technologies, and some of these technologies, existing and emerging technologies, could be especially important in advancing the SDG goals and targets. Secondly, I have proposed that the scientific community should be directed and mobilized to identify those scientific and technological breakthroughs that are necessary to advance the SDGs. Rather than scientific research be determined by multinational corporations and industry, it should be the objectives of the SDGs which should motivate scientific and technological research in order to promote sustainable development. Thirdly, the Secretary General has proposed a roadmap for digital cooperation. I believe that progress on this is essential to avoid turning the digital divide into a development divide. One of the areas of focus for the upcoming STI forum, the Science and Technology Forum under ECOSOC, will be on how to close the digital divide, looking specifically at improving infrastructure and the capacity to work with stakeholders to develop digital applications. I acknowledge the strong and robust process to advance STI roadmaps for the SDGs and related capacity building initiatives led by the UN Interagency Task Team on Science, Technology, and Innovation, and the 10-member group to support the technology facilitation mechanism. You may also note that the UN online technology platform 2030 Connect was recently launched during the 2020 High-Level Political Forum. So the work on technologies discussed today is highly relevant to the work of ECOSOC. I look forward to a continuation of today's discussion in the lead up to the STI Forum and the High-Level Political Forum on Sustainable Development, including for COVID-19 response and recovery. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, for those remarks. We will now hear or see a video by Mr. Liu Zhenmin, UN Undersecretary General for Economic and Social Affairs.
Excellencies, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, the COVID-19 pandemic has inflicted grave suffering across the world. It will only be over when we have effective and safe vaccines accessible to all. At the same time, this crisis is a wake-up call for strengthening the science, policy, and society interface. We must build public trust in science and promote more effective international cooperation around science, technology, and innovation. The technology facilitation mechanism encourages a new multi-stakeholder way of deploying STI towards the sustainable development goals. Today's event is in line with this objective. It is an opportunity to discuss key technological solutions for responding to COVID-19, and it gives us a chance to assess how the technology facilitation mechanism can be used to disseminate key technologies and to stimulate innovations to develop new technologies where needed. Ladies and gentlemen, the ambitious 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development presents both a challenge and an opportunity for all of us. The challenge is to ensure that our actions match this level of ambition with effective policies, governance structures, human and institutional capabilities, financing, and technologies. The opportunity is to forge stronger bonds of international and regional cooperation in support of our shared goals, national commitments, and joint efforts. The technology facilitation mechanism can be a valuable instrument to help us achieve the SDGs, but it depends on what member states, together with stakeholders, do to leverage its potential. With the technology facilitation mechanism, all countries can tap into the benefits of modern science, technology, and innovation. Ladies and gentlemen, we are committed to continuing our collaboration with all of you to strengthen the science, policy, and society interface at all levels. UN DESA is actively engaged in disseminating good practices and promoting partnerships where STI are effective. For example, our recent call for technology-based responses to the pandemic drew hundreds of submissions, which we will share through our website. I encourage you all to stay engaged, and I wish you all an inspiring and fruitful discussion. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Liu. And now we will go ahead and begin our first panel, which will be a discussion about using science-based decision-making to counter COVID-19. So our panelists today, I'm very pleased to have with me a group of very distinguished panelists. We have Ms. Susan Athey, the Economics and Technology Professor at Stanford Graduate School of Business. Ms. Socorro Escalante, Coordinator of Essential Medicines and Health Technologies in the Division of Health Systems and Services at the World Health Organization Regional Office for the Western Pacific. Mr. Paulo Gadella, President of Fundación Oswaldo Cruz, or FIO Cruz, former member of the 10-member group of the UN Interagency Task Team on SDI for the SDGs. Mr. Human Haddad, Chief of Emerging Technologies for the World Food Program, and Mr. Vaughan Tarakian, Executive Director of the Policy and Global Affairs Division of the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine, and member of the 10-member group of the UN Interagency.
Tanya, you've been remuted.
Hi, I'm sorry. I hope, I'm not sure how much of that.
We've just missed about 30 seconds.
Okay, so I'll just briefly introduce everybody. So we got Ms. Susan Appy, Economics and Technology Professor of Stanford Graduate School of Business. Ms. Socorro Escalante, Coordinator of Essential Medicines and Health Technologies in the Division of Health Systems and Services, World Health Organization Regional Office for the Western Pacific. Mr. Paulo Gadella, President of Fundación Oswaldo Cruz, former member of the 10-member group of the UN Interagency Task Team on SDI for SDGs. Mr. Human Haddad, Chief of Emerging Technologies for the World Food Program, and Mr. Vaughan Tarakian, Executive Director of the Policy and Global Affairs Division of the National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine, and member of the 10-member group of the UN Interagency Task Team on STIs for STGs. So thank you all again. And Ms. Avi, maybe I can start with you. If you could just give just a brief overview of who you are and then some of the work that you've been doing.
Hi, thanks so much for having me here. So I'm an economist at Stanford, and I've been working on a number of projects in the pandemic. And I think some of the themes that really come out across the projects are that in an emergency, you need real-time information. And we weren't really prepared to gather that information and make it available to decision makers. And second, that when there's scarcity and very time-sensitive allocation needs, that chaos can ensue. And we need both coordination, but also when you have a limited supply of something and their emergency demand, that can lead to just chaos and misallocation rather than the correct incentives for investment. One of the first things that I worked on was measurement, and in some of my colleagues have worked on the fact that in high-income countries, we couldn't tell whether lockdowns were really driving behavior or just consumer response. And people brought together data from credit cards as well as mobile location to show that there actually was a fair bit of consumers staying home regardless of government policy, making it clearer that solving the pandemic was crucial to getting the economy back. With a team of development economists and nonprofits, a group of us deployed surveys across lower income countries where it's harder to get that digital trail to understand how people were doing. And there, we scraped together funding from academic grants and nonprofits, and had people calling and doing texts to try to survey people to see how they're doing, whether they were healthy, whether they could eat. Some of that is still in the peer review process, and I would say in the future, if we had a common framework and more institutional scale funding, we could have gotten a lot of that data to governments more quickly. And I think it was unclear who was in charge of that and how it was going to get done in an organized fashion, and that just made it slow for people to get data. Then in the issue of therapeutics, we saw challenges within the US and across the world in terms of getting real-time data about what was happening to patients in hospitals. The hospitals have their own systems, and so they locally see their data, but even in nationalized systems, a lot of times it's a couple of months before that data is processed into claims and made available at the national level. If you're chasing data from hospital system to hospital system, the pandemic surges come in different places, the patients move around, and so it really took a long time to get any kind of reasonable sized data set that would allow you to draw conclusions about whether patients should stay on their drugs, and also to help evaluate repurposed generics to see which ones might have promise for treating people in a low-cost way. We also had a huge lack of coordination on clinical trials. Most of the patients in clinical trials were in underpowered, poorly designed trials that would never actually lead to usable results. We told patients they were participating in trials that would help science when in fact it was going to be very difficult for their data point to actually contribute to knowledge. In the US and in some countries did a better job than others. The US was very poorly coordinated, and globally it's been hard to coordinate those trial designs to really get knowledge as quickly and efficiently as we should. Finally, I've been working on vaccine financing. One of the things there is that there was international organizations were focused on getting low-cost vaccines to the developing world cheaply. And then we had things for like emergency small use, but we really we weren't prepared to think about how to get vaccines to at scale manufactured to the world quickly. There wasn't enough knowledge about international supply chains and what the bottlenecks were likely to be. So it took quite a bit of time for various international organizations to gather that data. And then we needed a framework for contracting and providing the correct incentives for vaccine manufacturers to install sufficient capacity at scale. And we lacked international frameworks for how to do that contracting efficiently, how to deal with nationalism issues, and how to get funding out there in a way that would keep costs down, but on the other hand, create sufficient incentives for people to make early investments in a timely fashion and on a large enough scale. I think we're starting to get there now with COVAX and funding from the World Bank. But it takes a long time and very careful design to induce firms to expand their capacity so we can serve the world quickly, rather than just have rich countries come to the front of the line, buy up early doses, but without making enough capacity that the rest of the world can flow through quickly. So these are some of the issues that I've been working on and thinking about. And I think there's a lot of lessons for preparing for the next pandemic and just having the frameworks in place so that we can get to work on executing rather than trying to even figure out who's in charge, who's coordinating, and how do we get started. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Susan. I just want to move along with Ms. Escalante. Would you mind unmuting and go ahead, and the floor is yours.
Yes, good morning and good evening from Manila in the Philippines. It's a pleasure to be invited to this very important dialogue. So I'm Dr. Socorro Escalante. I am a medical doctor by profession. I have been working in WHO as the regional coordinator for essential medicines and health technologies in the Western Pacific region. I have been involved in the response in various capacities as a member of the pillar of the science and research, then moving on for a very short period as an incident manager of the incident management as systems team in the Western Pacific region. And then at the very early stage of the outbreak, I was deployed to manage the response in the Philippines at the country office in the Philippines. So there have been many challenges, of course, as we all know, around the world, including here in the Western Pacific, in terms of this outbreak. And primarily, of course, at the very start, this is a novel virus and there are a lot of unknowns, and countries have struggled to get the information to inform the decision making and actions at the local level. But I think what is also very important is that the world and the countries learn from every epidemic and from every public health emergency in the past. And because of this, for example, in the Western Pacific region, we have developed the Asia Pacific Strategy for Emerging Diseases since after SARS in 2005, and that guided the countries to continuously learn from every public health emergency and develop their systems for public health emergency in a step-by-step manner. So we think that most of the member states in the Western Pacific region were informed by those lessons and were able to mount a rapid and effective response against the outbreak because of the decades-long capacity building for public health emergency response. So I think it's very important to have the information and technologies early on at the start of the outbreak. And particularly, countries are struggling on what interventions for the response were needed. We have a range of very extreme lockdowns to exercising or implementing non-pharmaceutical interventions such as movement restrictions for some groups. But again, in the Western Pacific region, we have a tradition of always responding to the situation of the countries while also preparing for large-scale community transmission. And there was a mention of therapeutics and vaccines and other health technologies. Again, even at the very early start of the epidemic, countries are really looking forward to technologies such as, for example, diagnostics, testing, laboratory innovations in order for them to be able to identify, undertake early detection as well as surveillance of the virus. But even very early on, there have been a lot of interest into what therapeutics are going to be made available. And we have been monitoring a lot of what is happening in the front line. But early on, WHO has also organized at the very early stage the research and development group and institutions around the world has laid out the research and development blueprint and looked at doing the clinical trials for the candidate therapeutics. And early on, we had the solidarity trial for a number of candidate therapies. And then now moving on to the vaccines, as Susan has mentioned, there are a lot of interventions in the vaccines, and under the COVAX facility, there are several, at least 9 vaccines that are already candidates to be part of the COVAX facility. But it's also very important, again, learning from the previous epidemic, that WHO has put up the platforms for which the early registration, assessment of safety and efficacy, such as, for example, the emergency use listing platform has already been established. And this is enabling the research and development companies as well as manufacturers to get their candidate vaccines, therapeutics, and as well as diagnostics early on to be evaluated and to be used by countries.
Thank you, Sakura. I just want to briefly remind everyone, since we have limited time, if we could just, try to keep things as brief as possible and no judgment at all here, but I just want to make sure we have time for everybody. So if Paulo, if you can go ahead and please let us know.
Okay, thanks, Tanya. Just an important correction from my bios. I'm still a member of the 10-member group. However, I'm a former president of Fiocruz, where I still work and coordinate, okay? And I still work and coordinate what we call the Fiocruz strategy for the 2030 agenda, which is one of the main axes of its institutional development. Well, Fiocruz is a very unique institution. It's the main institution of science technology on health in Brazil. And it's sort of a kind of a holistic approach in terms of health, because we do from basic research to development of products, diagnosis, vaccines, pharmaceuticals. We do a lot of capacity building. We have postgraduate level courses. We have control quality in health. We also deal with a lot of issues relating to communication in terms of science and health. And so we are having this articulated way of facing challenges in the health field. So that's how we are working with COVID. We not only do a lot of work in terms of data analysis, epidemiology, basic research, but we are so involved. We developed diagnostics and produced diagnostics. We were also responsible for setting up big centers for diagnostic in Brazil. We are part of solidarity trials also in terms of many vaccines, different vaccines. And we have a tech transfer and agreement with Oxford AstraZeneca, and we'll hopefully be producing the vaccine in early beginning of next year. So again, we have this very strong connection with WHO. We have different collaboration centers with WHO. And we also work in terms of design policies for health and science technology in Brazil. In terms of this challenge of COVID, which is a very complex hazard in terms of systemic hazard worldwide, and also in terms of the connections and biological interactions of virus, clinical features, epidemiology, and so forth. We are working in all these areas, and for us, it's of utmost importance, the relation between science, society, and policies. As we are speaking now, we are facing a very critical moment again in terms of the COVID pandemics, with the second wave in Europe, with the increase in cases of in the US. A lot of different ways of facing national policies, a lot of questions related, so even in the case of hard-tested technologies, they're fraught now with questioning in terms of their relevance, in terms of alternative facts and political and ideological dispute. So I think this discussion we're having will be very important in terms of bringing attention to the not only the importance of science and technology for the COVID and for the SDGs, but also the limits and the connections that science has in terms of translating into policies and be understood by the population. I will keep here to try to not use too much time, and will be commenting other questions as we go along.
Thanks so much, Paulo. And I'm sorry about your title. I'd like to move to Human now.
Hello, everybody. I'm Human Haddad. I'm the head of emerging technologies at the United Nations World Food Programme, which is the largest humanitarian organization fighting hunger worldwide. We're serving 100 million people in 100 countries. We estimate that the number of people who would need assistance or do need assistance are about 600 to 700 million. And our resources only, of course, allow reaching a fraction of those. With COVID-19 and the economic impact of that, the next tier of vulnerable people are likely going to be pushed into the category of people who need assistance. And of course, there's an urgent need for increased resources, but more importantly, a need to work more intelligently or more efficiently with the resources that we have. Our mission is zero hunger and nutrition. There are other organizations who look after health, after education, protection, but we tend to look at everything in a siloed manner, in a narrow lens of nutrition or health and protection. And the related information then tends to be in the siloed systems of the various humanitarian organizations, governments, NGOs, and so on and so forth. What we've been working on is using blockchain and in particular the neutrality of blockchain to be able to see to what extent we can connect these various systems together to amalgamate all the information in one place and look at the correlation between things, because of course nutrition affects health, health and nutrition affect education, those might affect gender-based violence and so on and so forth. And in that sense, we want blockchain to work in a way to depoliticize information. And this ties into what Susan was saying earlier, that a lot of the challenges is just that we don't have enough information. So even when people do want to respond, it's not exactly clear who's assisting whom with what. There is a systematic over-targeting or under-targeting because of lack of this information. And we want to ensure more equitable outcomes. And as I mentioned earlier, to use the limited resources as efficiently and effectively as possible. Over, thank you.
Thank you very much. Bon Tarakian, are you on the line?
Thank you so much, Madam Chair and Excellencies, colleagues. It's a great pleasure to be here with so many of my people that I've interacted with over the past many years on science, technology, and the SDGs. And I hope that everyone's having a good morning and good afternoon or good evening. For purposes of time, I'm just going to focus on a few things that we've thought about in terms of the relationship between science advice and the pandemic. One is that we have to think about the question about speed and the role of science in discussion around speed. There was obviously having to figure out how to reconcile that the speed of decision making and the speed with which science was being determined around this virus were actually were asynchronous. Decisions were needing to be made, and as anyone who served, and I have as a science advisor, it's always tricky to realize that the speed with which somebody has to make a decision is oftentimes out of time step with the speed with which the science and the data are being collected and understood. And that's created some tensions, as one can imagine. And I think Susan spoke to some of these in her discussions around where some of this was coming out in terms of response. And then notwithstanding the other speed, which is the speed of the disease. The disease itself moves very quickly because it's a pandemic and it's a highly infectious disease. So we are dealing with questions of speed and how we reconcile those in the science advisory mechanism. And so what we think about is the role of the timescales that we went through in this and are continue to go through, which is first how science was meant to inform the understanding of the disease itself. And that was really building up from not zero, but really building up from a very low level of just understanding the nature of this disease. Second was the science and the advice needed to figure out how to begin to take the first steps to mitigate or control the spread of the disease. And we've seen sort of, I'd say, imperfect responses for many reasons, including some of the things I've mentioned. And now the third one in which we're beginning to look at is the speed with which the science is now helping inform how we actually deploy an increasing number of interventions. And so my organization, the National Academy of Sciences, Engineering and Medicine in the United States, has been very active in trying to help think through things like equitable distribution of a vaccine when it comes, how to think about how to use the different interventions that we might have. So I will finish with just one more sort of observation, which I hope sort of spurs some conversation here, which is the reality is we are looking at something that originally was, well, a global pandemic. It was a global pandemic being addressed and felt locally. And what we are now beginning to look at is how does the global system at the policy level and the scientific system level begin to develop the right approaches and mechanisms to better interact, to develop longer term policies and actions that move us beyond the acute phase into a more chronic set of interventions that can be useful for science and all of its different related fields to be helpful in addressing not only COVID, but any type of infectious disease that we begin to see in a pandemic coming forward. So I'm sorry to take a little bit longer than I originally thought, but it's a great pleasure to be here with so many of my colleagues.
Thank you very much to all of our panelists here. And I'd just like to go ahead and jump straight to the discussion. So I guess the first question I would like to ask all of you is basically, what is determining how effectively science and technology can be, how effectively they can be used in influencing decision making related to COVID-19? And if anyone wants to jump in, go ahead or raise your hand and I will call on you. Looks like oh, sorry, Paolo, please go ahead.
Yeah, this is a crucial question. I'm taking the example from WHO because it was very recurrent to the discussion in terms of the disconnection between STI and the public health problems, not only in terms of the funding that was directed to and the problems that we had to face, But during this COVID pandemics, I think WHO gave a very important example in terms of how to try to steer science-based evidence in terms of policies by doing the blueprint, which is one way of connecting all the community of scientists and trying to bring more consensus in terms of the policies. And so many other ways of working together, such as in the case of COVAX for vaccine diagnosis and so forth. No? So I think WHO did have a very important example to be studied, and maybe something that we should try to discuss more broadly, to think in terms of this, because it actually put in practice what we call a mission-oriented work. And it has very important effects. Of course, fraught with a lot of polemics and discussion, because there was some vicious attacks in terms of multilateralism, even against the WHO itself.
Oh, looks like Yvonne, would you like to respond?
Yeah, thank you, Tanya. So I think to the question of the role of science advice, I think one of the things we're learning, or that we've seen, is a little bit of a question of, is there something called science advice fatigue? So prior to being in my current position, I was the science advisor to the US Secretary of State. And a science advisor often has entree during a time of crisis, because you have the ability to come in and say, lots of things are happening, let me give you as much data as I can give you. And for an acute situation, that's actually something that can be, targeted and timely. With something that is, as COVID is, and actually I would argue as climate change has been, what you begin to see is, over time, a lot of science advice comes in, and the scientific process is learning more and more about something at the very same time that the policymaking community, and really actually the public, begins to kind of say, okay, I'm now hearing too much. There's too much stuff coming at me. I need decisions being made, and I'm sort of tired of all this advice coming in. Let's move on. And one of the things we can see, at least in my country, is this constant tension between the work of public health officials providing ongoing data and information and advice, and maybe, at least among some number of the population and political leadership, a belief that there's fatigue in that, we're done with that, let's move on. And I think that's a tension that's very real, and it will continue to be real as more and more topics require both the inputs of science, but the actions from policymakers.
Human, you want to respond briefly? And then I have another question I'd just like to go ahead and ask.
Well, what's your next question? Because then I might be able to come back.
Oh, well, it comes from our Facebook audience. And the question is, how shall countries without budgets cope when they lack capacity, particularly digital capacity?
Okay, so I'll still like to respond to the first one. I do think that there is an opportunity here for a better systematic engagement of society with science, in terms of sparking from a young age interest in science, but not only science, but the scientific method. And that is really important, and I think undervalued. Most of the progress we've made as a society has been based on science. And for example, you can track our societal progress based on the availability of power, from arms of a person, to a horse, to steam, to electricity, to fossil fuel, to nuclear power. And we might then harness the energy of our planet, our sun, our galaxy, so on and so forth. But as an important part of the scientific process and theories, not only they explain current phenomena, but they make predictions, testable predictions. And for example, before Einstein, nobody, perhaps in the entire history of universe, never had a nuclear fission reaction, but that was predicted and it was then proved. And we might be yearning for years of, let's say, when the air was cleaner, or when there were less artificial borders, but we happen to be living in the pinnacle of scientific and technological advancement. For millennia, theorists were behind experimentalists. For example, the black body problem. Why does something glow like a metal. If you heat it, why does it glow? And the theorists then had to explain something that led to quantum theory, which has now been tested to an extreme accuracy. Point here being, though, that I think as humans, we have a propensity to want to believe something, even if it's false, than not to have any answer at all. And by engaging the public from an early age, displaying how the scientific method works and how it's led to the progress of our society, then prepares us better for things that Juan was mentioning, that this is the best thing we have right now. This is the evidence. Historically, it has always been leading to our progress and betterment. And therefore, I think that will increase the appetite for the community and society to be able to absorb sort of the advice that comes out and have patience with it if they understand how it works and how successful it has been always so far. Over.
Thank you. So I just wanted to see if any of the other panelists wanted to answer the question about, you know, how countries that don't have the budgets or resources of wealthier countries, how can they access, how can they cope when they lack digital capacity? I guess, go ahead, Hamad.
Well, this is a bit of an indirect answer, but of course there's a, you know, these kind of things typically get funded by governments. There's an increasing desire to engage the private sector because the private sector tends to be more efficient, faster, but it's also, the process is a little bit wasteful, I think. To me, the longer term solution, and we had the opening remarks in terms of intellectual property and so on and so forth. To me, we really need to embrace the concept of co-opetition in the sense that let's collaborate on the infrastructure and let's compete on the services or the ideas. So a lot of even the lower income countries have bright people, but they don't necessarily have access to the resources or the laboratories or whatever else is needed. If we can come as a global community together and collaborate on the infrastructure, create what is necessary to make advancement, and then allow people, including from lower income countries, to participate in that process, given that they're no less bright. That way, I think lower income countries then can also make a direct contribution and therefore benefit from whatever results that are produced as part of that collaboration. Over.
Thank you. I see Paolo's hand up, and then I just wanted to, you know, follow up and ask if our other panelists, Susan or, sorry, go ahead.
Okay, we do have a lot of South-South cooperation. Brazil is sort of a middle-income country, but has a lot of connection with not only Latin American countries, but from Africa and so forth. Of course, in an emergency, then you have to think in terms of the ways we have pooling of resources in the case of health, for instance, like WHO, PAHO, and so forth. But we always think in terms of the long term, and we favor the idea that to really overcome this asymmetry that there is between regions, and we have to think in terms of structured horizontal cooperation. In our case of health, we always think in terms of what are the main features in terms of health that would bring more permanent capacity in these countries. And this, of course, is what we call the essential health service in terms of capacity building, in terms of vigilance, in terms of health systems. So, I mean, we have to change this idea that there is a sort of an assistance to countries, and to think in terms of building together permanent and resilient structures that will at least lessen this asymmetry that we have worldwide.
Thank you, Paolo. So I just like to move along with our next question. What lessons can countries learn from their experience in order to reinforce or build up their national capacities for science-based decision making. And you want to take, Susan, I see your hand. And then
Sure.
Socorro.
Yeah, so I think that one place where we've seen things have gone better is when there were already established relationships or established organizations that had expertise and therefore were able to move more quickly. And I think I kind of painted a more negative picture in the beginning, trying to talk about the things we needed to fix. But on the other hand, we had these international organizations that did have experts on vaccines and so on. And so those people were well positioned to pull in additional advisors and gather data and start making plans. And so I guess one thing that I saw early on is that there was, in the places where there were pre-existing relationships and established research bases and organizations, they were able to mobilize quickly, while in other areas, it's taken longer for people to even decide, how to organize themselves. And so I think a lesson for the future is to realize that there's some situations where you're going to need to make decisions quickly. And, there's a whole variety of emergency situations we could face in the country, not just in the world, not just pandemics that would affect health. And so we might like to do better in terms of anticipating problems, having the scientific frameworks laid out. And just as an example, I mentioned retrospective analyses or analyses of health data as it comes in. The scientific community hasn't really decided how it evaluates, interprets, and disseminates non-randomized trial data, which can play a very important role in terms of guiding early medical decisions, as well as in terms of prioritizing clinical trials. And so if the scientific communities can come together and say, hey, if we're in here are some outlets where we might publish this work, and here are some experts who can shape the ability to evaluate well and interpret the differences. Like the early chloroquine trials were comparing two very different hospitals, but the research wasn't written in a way that really elucidated the differences and the challenges, and then the press kind of misinterpreted it. So we had a lot of that kind of confusing information that was partly the fault of the press and the public over interpreting, but also partly the fault of the scientific community not having agreed upon how we would disseminate that. And I think similarly around the clinical trials, we had some organizations, set up these highly high quality, multi-country or multi-facility trials that actually allowed you to learn things, and then other places did not. And if we had laid that foundation earlier, we could have coordinated more quickly. So it's really laying the foundation, and a lot of our international scientific organizations could convene the right experts and put into place the institutions that would help our regular progress of science, because we already have problems, with trials and data on the regular course of business. And if we could get some of those problems solved in advance, then we can in turn mobilize for emergencies. And then I guess one other thing is, again, just sort of getting some sense of, well, who's going to be in charge? Like everybody thinks somebody else is going to fund certain things. And, there was a lot of waiting to see who was going to fund what. Well, the people with good projects were going around with 10 cups in their hands, trying to figure out, where to get the funding. And everybody say, well, I think, this group is going to fund it. I think that group's going to fund it. And so if we have a little bit more planning around those things and frameworks in place, we can move more quickly.
I see your hand up, Vaughn, and I think we have to keep moving along because we still have a couple of questions to get through here. So I'll just ask the next question, and if you want to address that or, come back to this, we can do that. But so our next question is just, how can the international community, and this sort of plays into what you were saying, Susan, but how can the international community, including the UN, help to ensure that scientific research and innovations related to COVID-19 are accessible to all? Do you want to? Vaughn or Socorro, your hand I think was up just a little bit earlier, so maybe if you want to go first, and then Vaughn, go ahead.
Yes, thank you so much, Tanya. I just wanted to take the previous question and this question together. And I would like to start on the previous question by saying that most of the public health interventions and public health measures that were employed to respond to this pandemic is our capacities and lessons that we have learned from the past epidemic and from the past pandemic. So it is very important, and I'm going back to my earlier point, that we learn from every outbreak and we learn from every public health emergency. And from those learning, we build the evidence that will inform and make us better to respond to the next public health emergency. For example, for this coronavirus, which is novel, we know it's a respiratory infection, and then we learn from our experience from SARS. So many of the public health interventions, such as non-pharmaceutical interventions and the quarantine measures, etc., were public health interventions that were already employed in the past. So in terms of looking at evidence-based information, and I go back to what Van has mentioned, it's about the speed. But at the very start of the pandemic, it's very difficult to really get the timely information to inform policy and decision making. However, as I have said, learning from the previous pandemics, it's very important to get those lessons drawn to apply to the current outbreak. So in terms of the role of the UN, again, I'm always coming back to the importance of learning from previous pandemics because, for example, the research and development blueprint and the platform that I was mentioning for emergency use listing for new and novel products such as vaccines and therapeutics, as well as diagnostics, were set up as a lesson of the Ebola virus outbreak in Africa. So after the Ebola outbreak, WHO said we need to initiate a platform for research and development so that the world can develop and can go ahead of introducing a new product at the very early stage of the epidemic. And now we have more than 200 vaccines, for example, in the pipeline, and many of the technologies that were used at the early part of the COVID-19 pandemic were all a product of this collaboration on research and the platforms that have been established. So I think moving forward, and what lessons can the UN will have to face the next pandemic or public health emergency, it would be a little bit of the same, of using these platforms to enhance global collaboration, and particularly in terms of ensuring that early technologies will be developed through these platforms.
Thanks very much, Socorro. And I'm very sorry, but it looks like we're actually over time here. So I think we're going to have to wrap up this discussion, unfortunately. I'm sure that there are many more fascinating insights here, but we'll just have to save that for the next time. So at this point, I think we will move into our breakout sessions. There will be one in English and one in Arabic. So if you signed up for the Arabic one, there should be a link in Zoom to join that. And if you are in the English one, you just stay in this room and we will go ahead with that in a moment here. So I will just give everybody a chance to switch over if you're in the other session, and then we'll move along with our next panel. Okay, so hopefully we are. All right, this is my first time doing a multi-room panel, so we'll see how it goes. So our next discussion, okay, so I have to go ahead. Our next discussion will be about regional perspectives on harnessing technology to limit the worst effects of COVID-19. And this will be a 30-minute section, so we'll try to keep it moving along. These are breakout sessions that are organized by UN DESA and the UN regional commissions. So All right, we'll go ahead and just go ahead and introduce our panelists here. Let me see if I can find you. Okay, so I'm sorry, I don't have the right. Okay, here we are. For some reason. I'm sorry about that. Okay, I know we have Susan Appy and Mr. Nebosa Nakis. I'm sorry, I can't. I don't want to mangle your name. Nebosa Nakisinovic from Austria, former Deputy Director General and CEO of the International Institute for Applied Systems Analysis, and former member of the 10-member group of the UN Interagency Task Force on SDI for SDGs. And I think we will also have a couple other, oh, I'm sorry, I have the wrong panel in front of me here. Let me just, give me one moment. Okay. I'm just going to confer with our organizer for a moment. Okay, sorry about that delay. I had the wrong speaker list in front of me here. So we have Jonathan Wong, Chief of Technology and Innovation at the UN Economic and Social Commission for Asia and the Pacific.
Hey Tanya, how are you?
Hi, how are you?
Good.
Sorry about that.
No worries.
I had too many different versions of this document in front of me.
This stuff happens on these things.
Yeah, I know. For some reason. Okay, so thank you, Jonathan. And for some reason, and I have, I'm sorry, I just minimized the document again. I really apologize. Jonathan Wong, Victor Conde, officer in charge of the Green Economy, Innovation and Technology section in the UN Economic Commission for Africa. Are you with us, Victor?
Yes, I'm here.
Great. Nebosa Nakisinovic, former Deputy Director General and CEO of the International Institute for Applied Systems Analysis and former member of the 10-member group of the UN Agency Task Team on SDI for the SDGs.
I'm also here.
Great. Songju Park, Deputy Director, Ministry of the Interior and Safety for the Republic of Korea, and contributor to the Compendium on Digital Governance Initiatives in Response to the COVID-19 Pandemic.
Hi, everyone. I'm here.
And I think I already introduced Jonathan, so that should be everybody. And let's go ahead and get started. And I will just begin with a question here. So here we are. Oh, and did I not introduce Ms. Bettina Mohammed Al-Kindi? Are you with us today?
I'm here.
Great, sorry, I didn't see you there. Okay. And you are the Senior Executive for e-Transformation, Ministry of Transport and Communications and Information Technology for the Sultanate of Oman, and contributor also to the Compendium on Digital Governance Initiatives in Response to the COVID-19 Pandemic. There will be, I think, a link to that compendium in the group chat at some point, so keep an eye out for that. So I just want to quickly, go ahead and jump in here. We have some questions that were submitted ahead of time. Let's pull those up. Okay, so just a question here from me. How can regional organizations help strengthen national capacities for science-based decision-making during the pandemic? If anyone wants to take that one.
I'm happy to jump in.
Sure, go ahead.
I'll give you kind of the view from, if you like, a regional organization covering the Asia Pacific. As you mentioned, I'm Jonathan Wong, Chief of Technology Innovation for Asia and Pacific. I think it's probably fair to say that all the regions have fared differently. if you look at Europe, the US, Asia, etc., Asia's probably fared a bit better, actually, in that respect. And certainly, I think when you ask what is the role to play of regional organizations nationally, I'd actually look at it the other way as well. Actually, how can regional organizations affect the global agenda? Because certainly, I think the key theme of countries in Asia Pacific's response to COVID-19 for me has really been this reinvigorated, collaborative and open approach to innovation. I think we really have this opportunity, and to see COVID as a global tech competition, which some regions are seeing it as, or an opportunity for unprecedented open innovation. And that's what we're kind of seeing in Asia and the Pacific. And to give examples, we're seeing in Korea, governments mobilizing the startup community and collaborating with the startup community around tracking and tracing. We're seeing government to government. So Vietnam engaging with the US CDC and the Oxford Clinical Research Unit, again, and really helps with an amazing response in Vietnam. We're seeing the government and the public kind of collaborating, probably more, dare I say, better than in some of the European countries and in the US. And I think a lot of that comes down to trust. And I think certainly the question you raised earlier around the how can we use science and technology to fight COVID better in the future? I think this whole more philosophical question of how do you build trust is going to be really, really critical and should be a really key policy agenda for governments. And I'll give examples. How do you build trust with the public around taking a vaccine that, as Vaughan mentioned, is rapidly going to be pushed through? In an era of misinformation, how do you build trust there? It's going to be critical. How do you build trust so that actually people will use track and tracing devices? You know, I think, again, these are, you take Australia, who've been really successful in this, who've been very, very transparent with their application. So I think certainly this issue of trust needs to come up. I think the second thing I would mention is, and you mentioned the how as well, in Asia, the private sector have mobilized. You have the giants like Alibaba playing a huge role in China. And just like looking at, I just looked at the speaker list here today. I think certainly around the how, I don't see a single tech company on this panel. You know, we're stuck in our bubble of the scientific community and us in the UN, and not a single private sector organization here. And I think it's going to be critical that we engage with them, not just around the technology, but I mentioned misinformation. How do we get the right information out there? And our governments, are the scientific community engaging deliberately and strategically the likes of Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter to get the right information out there? I don't think it's happening at the moment. So certainly these are some of the things that I see coming from Asia, that obviously from a regional organization would influence the national agenda. But I think these lessons should be taken to a more global level as well. I'll stop there.
Yeah, thanks so much for that. And you mentioned misinformation, which is also, of course, a very important topic to discuss these days. Nimbosa, I know you had raised your hand, so feel free to respond.
Yes, thank you. Well, first of all, I would like to thank organizers and you for the invitation to participate in this really important discussion. And please call me Naki, it'll be easier. My name is a little bit difficult. The first response I would like to make, yes, regional cooperation is essential, but we should not forget the need for the global cooperation. So both have to go hand in hand. And let me just mention my motivation why I think that way. If you look for one way, at the situation the world is facing, we have three major challenges. The COVID we have discussed in detail. The second one that we have not discussed in detail is the fact that in 2015, the 2030 agenda was approved by all nations in the Paris Agreement that gives us a visionary way forward, very ambitious, but visionary. And at the same time, I think there is a third one that was already alluded to, which is the digital revolution. And it's the confluence of these three, I think, that is relevant. And this is why I think we need global efforts, in particular in science and technology and innovation, because one could argue, or I think that is quite strongly established in the history, that the Industrial Revolution was explosive because it was powered by science, technology, innovation. And the digital revolution, the next one that's ahead of us, will be equally important, I believe. And we can see already that in the first responses to the COVID infection, digital technologies are making a big difference. They're changing our lives. At the same time, billions are excluded. I think this is really our challenge, that with the inequality that has been increasing does not increase even further. But I'm acutely aware of the time, so let me just make one relevant point here. European Union and countries around the world have pledged trillions, on the order of 2% of the global economic output, for COVID recovery. You know, maybe 16 trillions, 20 trillions, depending how you count. This could be used for building not just back and better back, for building forward in the sense of the SDGs. And I think this is a huge opportunity from my point of view, and I appreciated the points that other speakers have made, that there might be some fatigue of science advice in this area, that we are running behind the events. This is my last point that I would like to raise, is that I think, like European Union has the Green Deal, which is the way forward on technology and also how to change the society. I think we need a global assessment, scientific assessment, like the assessment of the climate change, the IPCC, on the way forward in the post-pandemic world, because it's not going to stop here. COVID and other zoonotic infections will be here with us. I think we need an assessment to be ready for this kind of tsunami wave that's ahead of us. So I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, Naki. And I just want to keep things moving along, so I'm going to ask the next question, and then if Victor or anyone else wants to jump in, feel free. So how can regional leaders in science, technology, and innovation better connect with one another in order to share data and good practices? Anyone like to take a stab at that?
Yep. Well, thank you very much for the invitation. And of course, I think regional organizations and regional leaders have play an important role. I will actually provide a few answers to some of the questions that came out early. From the African perspective, I think one of our efforts has been actually mobilizing funding for our member states. But working together with the African Union and others, we have been able to convince, for example, some of the lenders that countries at least not pay during this time of the pandemic, and some of whom have actually have been able to provide relief, which is, you are not saying they cancel it, you're just saying, can you stay your date for maybe a period of time? And that would not have happened if countries were going to negotiate one by one. And the second, of course, which relates to your question, has to do with, for example, global procurement, or what you call pool procurement. If every country has been buying tests and medicines at completely different prices, some overpriced if you are very small, and bigger ones like South Africa can negotiate perhaps for better prices by providing simply a platform where there maybe 5-6 countries can actually buy either medical devices or vaccines together. They are able to cut down costs. Now, in terms of science, of course, we have just launched a platform where a number of member states can find all the information you need on COVID, whether it's on research, on vaccines, or it is on, let's say, medical equipment, or just on trends of, for example, on how the disease is progressing. You can all find it on one platform. Basically, by agglomerating all the information the rest of the world is providing, from Johns Hopkins and everyone else, WHO, and also bringing the private sector on board, which is something I think someone has mentioned, working together with a bank that's able, for example, to provide some funding on a platform. Countries can negotiate for really better rates and therefore advance, I think, maybe science and technology applications in a pandemic like this one. I think someone already mentioned Ebola. For Africa, Ebola gave us, the last Ebola actually gave us really a big lesson, and it pushed, for example, the development of the Africa CDC. And we are hoping this one will actually give us a push in enabling countries actually invest more in science. And that you can already see from countries like South Africa mobilizing extra funding for science, technology, innovation research. So in a way, there is actually a role organizations can play in at least helping their member states meet some of the challenges that COVID-19 can bring. The last one is something everyone was mentioning, digital is important, sure. But in Africa, we found out, yeah, it's nice to have digital, but if you have no energy, actually your internet goes off. Right here, if my electricity goes off so many times. So in a way, investment in infrastructure should not be just IT infrastructure. All infrastructure is really needed. And whether it's water for washing hands. So thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you so much for those comments. And you make a very strong point about, it's not just a matter of high-speed internet, sometimes you just need your basic power and things like that. So I think the next question kind of dovetails a little bit with what has been raised already, I think by Jonathan, which is, what are the tools that are necessary in order for successful innovations to be replicated and scaled up within countries? And I would add to that, how can we take advantage of some of the digital tools that are out there already? Song, go ahead.
Hi, thank you very much for the invitation to be part of today's panel. I just wanted to address that I will be coming from the national point of view as I work for the Korean government, that when it comes to combating COVID-19, as Jonathan said, I think we found that the most important thing is the trust. It is crucial that we have trust of our citizens in government. It's not about having fancy technologies. All the measures that we are taking are just using simple technology to provide apps, a website where we can deliver correct data, correct information to the citizens when they need it, as soon as they need it. So they can be prepared, they can get face masks if they need it, they can find help if they are infected with COVID-19. And in Korea's case, what we did was we tried to be open and transparent as much as we could. We opened data, quality data, so that our private sector can utilize them and develop apps for the citizens to use for free. And sometimes governments trying to do everything, it just takes time, and sometimes it's not user friendly to the citizens. So I just wanted to point out that we have to try to build trust between government and citizens first. And I just want to go back to the second question that you asked, that as a national government, we have been utilizing platforms like this, the UN DESA, and also with OECD and digital nations, like smaller multilateral cooperation groups, where we share our experiences, we consult each other, we bring our experts together so they can have exchange of knowledge, best practices. Luckily, it has been moving very fast, and then we were able to learn from each other and then bring some of the best practices into Korea and then help others to learn from the Korea's case. I think that's the most important role where international organizations and then also the regional organizations can facilitate communications among the national members. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Song. And at this point, I just wanted to mention that both you and Botena you're from South Korea, and Botena is from Oman. And both of these countries have contributed to DESA's Compendium on Digital Governance Initiative. And this link, the link to that is now in the chat for anyone who wants to learn more about that. So at this point, I'd just like to give Botena, I'd like to give you the opportunity to talk about what Oman is doing in terms of digital policy and COVID-19.
Thank you very much for the invitation. I really thank all the participants in the last discussion, and this discussion is really enriching how the experience of the government entities or from their side also. From our side, as a Ministry of Transportation and Communication Technology, from the beginning of the pandemic, we receive a very high level, direction from His Majesty himself to directly evaluate all the initiatives, because we know that, immediately when the pandemic started, lots of initiatives, especially related to emerging technologies, were starting to come up as, for everything. So we form up a committee related to the innovation and technology in order to evaluate and also support the initiative to start up and emerging very quickly. And as mentioned by Simon here, we also create a platform and also supported by an app which is provided for all citizens and also all government entities, which serve all levels of the country, starting from decision makers to the citizens and themselves, to provide all the necessary information about that related to the COVID-19 and also related to the current situation. Moreover, we as a government, we as a country, we look to support, the technology, how to support the small business. You know that Oman, as it's known as for, there is small business too much, and we would like to, through the pandemic, to support those small business in a way that provide all the technologies that can help them to continue and sustainability their business in Oman.
Thank you, Botena. I just wanted to ask a question that was submitted by an audience member ahead of time, which is about, how kind of what policies and technical solutions have enabled the most vulnerable and marginalized sections of society, including women and rural children, in order, what policies have enabled them to, fully address this challenge? I think Jonathan, go ahead, and then Botena.
Yeah, maybe just what I would say would be, you look what happened in Bangladesh. Obviously, a lot of, I think Botena mentioned it, a lot of small businesses were going out of business because of this. A lot of people losing their jobs, and what Bangladesh did was amazing. Again, COVID has done for digitization what no chief digital officers could ever do for an organization or indeed the world. And they use digital for their social protection system. So in the space of 2 weeks, they mobilized a digital payment system that reached the kind of millions of people within Bangladesh to get them kind of the money they needed just to survive, and indeed to the very poorest. So there's kind of one example I would give around that, just around just simple things like payments. As Song mentioned, some of these technologies aren't particularly fancy or indeed new, and I think certainly for COVID, we need to look more at appropriate technology. And I know there's a lot of hype about AI and how blockchain can do X, Y, and Z. But I think in times like this, we need to go with what works, what has efficacy, and think of the impact as opposed to the novelty in the first instance.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think Sung made that point as well, that, you know, it's not always the most high-tech solution, it's the one that actually works. I see Naki's hand up, but Tena, do you want to briefly, I think we have about 3 minutes left. So if,
yeah, I will try to make it, I will try to make it very fast in order just to allow the other people. I mean, I see Nick was also raising his hand. So from our side, I mean, in order to support also, I mean, the SMEs, beside also the women, especially the working mom and the children themselves, we work also together as, I mean, a committee in order to issue a policy related to the working remotely from home. So this policy was really supporting all I mean, especially the working moms and also the women that working in small business. And we initiative and also approved by the committee itself, and it was spread through all government entities in Oman. So that's why, I mean, to set out, not only by introducing technologies, it's also by introducing policies that help and support those segments, I mean, in order to let them survive and sustainability of their business and their also work during the pandemic.
Yes, thank you so much. Naki, feel free, go ahead.
Just briefly, because I'm aware of time, let me just strengthen what or amplify what Jonathan has said. I think the mobile tool, mobile phones are the main technology for achieving dissemination about response to the COVID. We shouldn't forget that this is one of the greatest success stories of STIA's science, technology, innovation. Essentially, after 30 years of mobile phone introduction, everybody in the world has a phone, including people who do not have billions, who don't have access to or reliable access to electricity. And many of the countries that have been successful in fighting the first wave of COVID have done it with the apps over the phone. Now, I'm aware that the digital divide means that most of the phones will not be the new smartphones, but they can be communications like the banking, the credits we heard about. I think there is an acute necessity, in my view, to organize consultations of how this technology that essentially everybody has can be used for the speedy reform. So I think that would help with the trust issue that has been raised. It would help reduce the uncertainty, because we don't speak with the same voice, the scientific community. I think we have to reduce the uncertainty, and it would reduce the complexity, because I think simple facts on the hygiene, on the separation, I think are the most powerful tools we have right now to respond to the COVID-19.
Yes, thank you so much for those insights, and welcome back to everyone else from the Arabic session. I believe everyone should be joining us back in this breakout, or in this big session again. So if Fuad Rad, if you are here, he is the Senior Program Manager for the Technology for Development at the UN Economic and Social Commission for Western Asia. Oh, I'm sorry, apparently he is not here yet, so I will wait a moment before our other participants join us again. Technology. Speaking of technology, get everybody up in the same place here. I just want to thank all of our panelists once again for all of your insights. And I know it's a lot to pack into a short time, so I really appreciate you all being here. we've all had to adapt to this new normal. So I think your point, Naki, about how everybody has cell phones, and that I think that's an important one, because in no other pandemic in history, pretty much, has there been such universal communications technology. So it's interesting, it's a double-edged sword, because you can have instant communication, but also instant misinformation being propagated as well. So we didn't have time to discuss that too much, but I think that's an important point to mention. And I believe we have our other session here as well. So I'd like to turn it over now to Mr. Fuad Murad, Senior Program Manager for Technology for Development at the UN Economic and Social Commission for Western Asia, who will provide some highlights from the Arabic session. Fuad.
Thank you very much. And I want to thank my colleagues from the region who joined this session for half an hour, and we had an interesting discussion, especially with our two speakers from Lebanon and Jordan. The key messages that were discussed with our partners, I'd like to share with the rest of the participants. One, during crisis, and we're living one global crisis now, many multinational corporations like Facebook and Google made available certain data sources that are extremely critical and important in mobility and other sentiments, what have you. Who decides, what's the criteria that these MNC will adopt to say this is a crisis at the international level, and therefore we're going to share data, we're going to allow researchers and decision makers and data scientists to use the data? So who determines the local or international crisis? And dependency on that kind of data is, risky. Two, from Twitter and social media analysis that we just applied in assessing the effectiveness of policies and decisions made in Lebanon, and they were made in Lebanon under pressure like the rest of the world, answering COVID-19, we didn't learn from this analysis anything totally new, but the suspected concerns and trends were confirmed. So we had a confirmation of what we had suspected, which is important, especially Twitter data. Three, we learned quickly that the non-traditional data sources facilitated better granularity. So we have better resolution. Instead of saying poverty in the north or in Lebanon is like this, or in Jordan, now we say in this district and in this part of the city, thanks to the mobility from Facebook or Google, we have better estimate and better granularity of the data, which is very important, especially when it comes to responding to crises that could be very local. Four, and especially in our region, we have cyclic crises, not necessarily, health crisis. It could be conflict, security, nature. And the cyclic crisis like COVID, now we have wave 2, I don't know about wave 3, we proved that almost in real time, near real time, we could do a correction. And we did this in Lebanon because we tried to work with the government on correcting the second wave of Solidarity Fund. And that was very useful. So almost near real time correction is possible thanks to big data for the cyclic crisis nature. The last point I make, and I turn it back to you, is the bias. Obviously, we all know this is nature of the business. So depending on technology that not everybody, especially in developing nations, have access to this technology. So there is a bias. Not everybody is carrying, antenna in their pocket and have Facebook app and so on. So the bias, but it's a calculated risk. So we could calibrate, correct for it, knowing that when you are assessing effectiveness of policies, and then there are critical decisions made in planning at the national level and governmental level, it's very different than using big data in marketing. So there you can afford a lot of error. and it's not the end of the world. But here, because you're talking about planning and critical things, there are human lives involved and well-beings of society involved, and therefore big data is really challenged, and there is a lot of innovation needed because we need better estimates, because these are critical decisions and they are very far from what big data used to be very good at, which is the marketing tool and social media business. Over to you.
Thanks so much, Fouad. And thank you to everybody who has joined the session today. If you missed some of it, you can watch it at facebook.com/join UN DESA. And I just want to remind everybody that the next online Global Policy Series event will be Tuesday, November 24th on the topic of gender equality. More information will be posted on the DESA website, un.org/DESA. So thank you once again, everybody, for joining us for this discussion. And I wish you all a safe and healthy day. Thank you.
Great, thanks all. Cheers, Tanya. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you very much.
Bye.